Good morning, my name is Sam, my pronouns are they, them, and welcome to my office. Spooky season is fast approaching for some. I personally consider it to be here already, but I dislike summer greatly. I hate everything about summer. So I'm gonna just live in my little spooky realm and try not to die. And in preparation for that, I need to start figuring out my taste in horror. So I am someone who really likes horror. I like horror movies, I like horror books, I like horror content. But I'm super particular about it because I don't like gore, I don't like anything crazy. I'm just really picky. And when I got into horror books a little bit more last year, I read a lot of like thriller and Riley Sagar and like the super popular horror thriller kind of vibes that are going around. And I hated them. They were not good. Like, they were fine, they were mediocre, but they were not for me. They were not something that I would want to continue to read. So, this year, I really want to kind of start tailoring my horror content to my own tastes. And with that comes so much exploration. So I've picked out a group of, I think, 5 books that I'm going to be testing out to kind of figure out what direction I want to go with my horror going forward. And based on last year's horror TBR that I was consuming, everything that I liked was queer. So I really liked Sorrowland by River Solomon, The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Giesbrecht, and White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. And this year, the horror that I've really loved the most was All the White Faces by Wilks. All 4 of those books are queer horror. So I'm just going to take the statement, I really like queer horror, and we're going to run with it. So let's go over the TBR. So I have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, which is a vampire, like, you can consider it a dark romance if you want to, but I'm going to put it under the horror category in the way that Anne Rice is kind of put under the horror category. I have Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White, which is a post-apocalyptic religious trauma sci-fi horror kind of vibe. I have The Deep by River Solomon, that can be considered a dark fantasy, but could be considered a horror. In River Solomon, they wrote Sorrowland, which was my favorite horror of last year. It was so good. So of course I have to pick up another one of their novels. I have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, which is supposed to be like a up-and-coming classic sapphic horror. It has to do with water. Ocean, ooky spooky, scary stuff. You don't know what's under there. You know, I seem to like that. I seem to like people going to places where they should not be going and finding ooky spooky things, because I would never be that person. Exhibit A, All the White Spaces by Wilks. And then finally, I'm actually picking up an anthology. This is probably the first anthology that I've picked up since I graduated college in December of 2020. But it is Queer Little Nightmares, which is supposed to be like queer versions of like classic horror, classic like cryptids, all that stuff. And that's our plan. We're gonna kind of pick things out, see how I'm feeling about different vibes, and use this information to not only give you ideas for beginners queer horror, things that are not too ooky spooky, too overwhelming, but things to give us a good baseline understanding of where we should go with our horror TBRs next. Because TikTok is pushing some hardcore horror that I can't handle. So let's start at the baseline. Let's go. So I have updates on some things that I have been reading for this queer horror beginners vlog, whatever you want to call it. So last year I participated in Summerween, but I got really into it and I really tried to get through it, and I didn't enjoy most of the things that I read. The things that I did enjoy reading were like The Monster of Elendhaven and White is for Witching, which were two queer horrors. But I read a lot of like Riley Sagar too, and I like didn't enjoy any of it. So now it's a year later, it's Pride, and I'm like, let's figure out my horror taste. And I'm definitely a beginner. So I started off with A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, which I don't really know if you want to call it a horror or if you want to call it like a gothic romance. I guess you can kind of consider it as either. I kind of put it under the category of like Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice, but like way better. Way better. Because I DNF'd Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. I hated that. But A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson was about this woman, Constanza. It's all told by her. It's like a letter or a journal entry to her lover. And we know from the very beginning, from chapter 1, that her lover is dead and that she killed him. So this is all kind of a retelling for her of like how that all came to be and like walking through her relationship with her love throughout their lives before she ultimately killed him. So this is queer, this is polyamorous, this was lyrical, this was beautiful. So this starred Constanza. She had one female lover and then she had another male lover on top of her husband. I can't remember his name. I don't know. I don't think they gave his name. But he is the one who turned her into a vampire. And they became husband and wife, and then he slowly just started adding people into their relationship without her consent at all, which is not like a good way to do polyamory in any capacity. But she did love the other people within her relationship, and it was honestly just like a beautiful lyrical kind of gothic horror romance. There was definitely a little bit of blood and gore. I mean, obviously it's a vampire romance, so it's not going to be like rainbows and sunshine, and there was definitely like abuse within the relationship from her husband. You know, he wasn't particularly a good man in any capacity. But I felt that the relationship between Constanza and the two other people within their polycule was really sweet and beautiful and loving. I gave this book a 4 stars. I thought it was really good. I think that you can skip over Anne Rice. And I know that might be blasphemy because I know she's like a classic vampire writer, but I think you could skip over Anne Rice and just go to S.T. Gibson. It's so much better. It flows better, it's more interesting, it's more dynamic, and you know what? It's not as long. I really enjoyed it. So that was A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I believe that there are supposed to be more stories in this series, but I really have no idea. And then I have been reading Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. So this is a post-apocalyptic trans horror. There's a cast of queer characters. It has a lot of religious trauma in it, which I think is interesting. I'm always interested to read about religious trauma because I don't have any at all, which is fantastic for me. So it's all about this kid, Benji. He's a trans kid, and he's who we start out with. He has hella religious trauma, and he's basically like the savior for the evangelical Christian group that has popped up, and I think has partially caused like the apocalypse, if I'm not incorrect. I kind of look at it as to they have really, if they didn't put off like the first spark of the apocalypse, they've definitely like enhanced the apocalypse a lot. And they injected Benji with the flood to try and get a seraph, which is like this 6th wing, like master of chaos creature thing. And the seraph can control all of the graces, which are the people who were infected by the flood, and they like turn really weird. They turn into monsters. There was this one guy apparently who his skin just kind of turned inside out, and I'm just like, oh my god, that's horrible. I don't want to say the gore factor in this is high, because this is the kind of gore that I can handle, where it's just like, oh my god, that's disgusting. But it's not Cormac McCarthy gore. And if you know what I mean by that, I'm so sorry that you have had to read Cormac McCarthy. I know that's probably kind of rude to say because he just recently died, but I stand by my statement. Sorry you died. But Benji runs away from this horrible evangelical Christian group, and he gets in with the ALC, which is a queer community within Philadelphia, I believe, is where they are living out their apocalypse. And he's joined in with them, and only one other person in the entire group knows that he is a Sarah. You know, they're planning on causing some pretty severe harm to this group for all of the harm that they cause to everyone else. So yeah, right now I'm like 165 pages in, so I'm probably like a third of the way there, and I'm enjoying it so far. I don't think this is going to be like a 5-star for me. I don't think that this is the perfect book for me. I can tell you that my girlfriend, who, she doesn't really read, like I try to get her to read and she does not. I had this just sitting on the couch and she picked it up and she started reading the synopsis and she was like, when you're done with this, I'm taking it. And I was like, okay. So she's really into like horror and gore and sci-fi and all of that. So I think that she's gonna like this one a lot more than I will. But I really like Andrew Joseph White's writing style. So it means that I'm really excited for his next book that's coming out, which is, I believe, about a Victorian autistic trans boy. So I'm really excited for that one. So I think that Andrew Joseph White is an author that I could really come to love, but I think that it just kind of depends on what story he's telling. I still think that I'm going to like this. Like, I'm still enjoying my time with it, but it's not my genre. I'm enjoying it, but I'm not obsessed. So yeah, I am going to go make some food and I'm going to keep reading this and I'm going to hop in my hammock and we're going to just keep busting through some horror. Hi, hello. Let's talk about some books. I kind of updated on Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White, but I finished that like maybe 2 days ago. And I ended up giving it like 4 stars. I really liked it. I do stand by the thought that this is a better horror book for my partner than it is for me. And that's not even saying that this was like super gross, gory, whatever. Because I'm not even saying that it was like gross or gory or terrible or anything. Because I'm not someone who can handle gore. Gore is not something that I do well. Also, I got stabbed. Gore is not something that I handle well, but that is not to say that like that this was unmanageably gory. This definitely was gory. This definitely had body horror, but it wasn't like that kind of weird gore that makes you kind of want to vomit all the time. Like, I feel like it was intense gore, but it didn't give me the heebie-jeebies, if that makes any sense whatsoever. There was mass, like, body mutilation and, like, beastly things. So basically, they put the flood in people, they get sick with this virus, and then the virus kind of shifts them into, like, non-human entities made out of human entities, and, like, sometimes it's, like, the flood is, like, consuming multiple bodies and, like, smushing them all together and creating, like, these weird things like Hall of Graces. And it's just weird. It wasn't so visceral that it made me, like, want to put this down. Things that had body horror that I had to put, that I, like, really, really, really desperately wanted to put down but physically couldn't make myself. Things have gotten worse since we last spoke by Eric LaRocca. Horrible. The Human Centipede. Horrible. Things that I wanted to put down and never pick back up, but I couldn't make myself. This was not that at all. So I agree with its categorization as a young adult horror. I think that this was a really, really good young adult horror, and I really liked a lot of the relationships in there. I thought our main character, Benji, and his relationship with, I don't know why I'm forgetting this boy's name, because I really liked him, and he's a very visceral character in my head. Like I really actively remember him, but I cannot remember his name. He was one of the other main characters. He was an autistic boy, and he was very, very sweet, and I really, really liked them together. Like, not their romantic relationship, really. Like, the romantic relationship was good. It was developing, it felt realistic, it felt good. But I really just enjoyed, like, their dynamic and the way that they functioned together more than anything else. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4-star. I'm more excited for Andrew Joseph White's next book that's coming out, which is The Spirit Bares Its Teeth. It's a gothic horror set in an alternate Victorian England where mediums control the dead. Like, that sounds much more my vibe than Hell Followed With Us, and I really liked his writing style, so we're good to go with the next book. I'm really happy with how that turned out. Now, what am I currently reading? So I'm currently reading, in the horror-ish field, 2 things. So one of them is not technically a horror, but I'm kind of counting it as like a beginner's horror, and it is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This is kind of more considered a dark fiction, but I'm gonna put it in a horror category personally. So this is about the Wajanru. I'm probably butchering that, but the Wajanru people, they are kind of like these sea creature mermaid type that were formed from the babies of slave women who were thrown overboard. These women were thrown overboard and drowned in the sea from their slave ships, and they were pregnant, and the babies were just like, nope, this ain't right, and they adapted to their undersea environment as needed to be to survive, and whales ended up, like, for the most part, nurturing them. And there's a lot of talk about how many of these creatures weren't able to survive because they were picked off by, like, other sea creatures before someone safe could get to them, and that's a really big guilt portion for it. So the premise itself, honestly, is kind of horrifying. Like, it just, like, I understand why it's categorized as, like, a dark fiction, but I think that there's merit to it to be put in the horror category. And on top of not only their origin story as a people, I just want to talk about, like, their practices. So we're following Yetu, who is the historian for this group of people. And what that means is that every single memory from these people that have been collected over, I think, 600 years that they've been around are in her. And she just has to, like, live with them, and they kind of overtake her a lot of the time, and she's basically almost dying because she's so sensitive to these memories that they take her, and she gets lost in them for, like, days, weeks, months at a time. Like, she's not eating, she almost dies a couple times. Like, it's a really big thing, and basically they do this so that the entirety of these people don't actually have to hold memories. They can just make her hold the memories, and then once a year she comes back, and for, like, a 3-day ceremony, I think, she gives all of the memories back to them for 3 days before they forcibly put them back into her. So they don't have to hold them, they don't have to witness the pain and suffering of their ancestors anymore. She's just the only one who has to do it. So she is in this ceremony, and she's like, you know what, if they give me back these memories, I'm not going to survive. I'm going to die. And I haven't picked a successor, so all of the memories are going to be gone anyway. So, like, no matter what, if I take these memories back, like, they're gone, I'm dead, we're all screwed. So she's like, you know what, I'm not going to take them back. And she leaves. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. She has left. She's kind of fighting with a lot of her own issues and kind of working through things. I think that this is kind of horrifying. I'm really enjoying it. Well, I knew I was going to like this because it's Rivers Solomon, and I think that they are such a fantastic author, and I loved Sorrowland so much. So I'm kind of, like, I know it was only one book, but, like, I'm totally ready to put Rivers Solomon on, like, my top favorite authors of all time because they are just that incredible. So I knew that I was going to love this, and I'm super into, like, sea-dwelling creatures and such. But yeah, so I'm about halfway through this right now. I'm really enjoying it. I think that it's a pretty fantastic, like, beginner's to River Solomon. Like, I thought Sorrowland was fantastic. I loved every second of it. But if you are someone who feels like you need to, like, be eased into horror a smidge, I would say start with The Deep and then go to Sorrowland, because I think they're both fantastic. And then another thing that I have started reading that I have not fully, like, started, like, I'm on the first story, is Queer Little Nightmares. It's an anthology that Books and Lala read at some point, and I've kind of held it in my brain ever since, being kind of curious about it. So it's basically like reimagining like classic horror monsters in like a queer lens, I believe. And I'm really, really excited for it. I think what I'm going to do with it is I want to kind of walk through every like 3 stories and talk about them. So I'm hoping to get started on that a little bit more. That's kind of where I'm at. And then once I'm done with The Deep by River Solomon, I will get to Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, and that will complete this TBR for some beginner horror, some horror to kind of get me in the mood, because you know what's coming in July? I hope, Summerween. That's been this update. Let's go to work. Let's do a little update on our beginner-friendly queer horror. So, I finished out The Deep by River Solomon. This was a perfect, like, beginner's queer horror because it could be categorized as a horror or it could be categorized as, like, a dark fantasy. And we've already had, like, a quick discussion about how the society was formed. But realistically, like, the most horrifying part about this is also the fact that they are forcing this amount of trauma onto one person in the society to, like, be a sacrifice for them, for the most part, to their history, because they don't want to take on the burden of their own history, but they still want the benefits of, like, knowing their history and, like, having that accessible to them, which is just a horrifying concept. To have to go through all of, like, those brutal, awful moments constantly and, like, be expected for you to consider that to be, like, an honor is a horrifying, horrifying thing. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. The Deep by River Solomon is just everything. I love River Solomon. If you are looking for a good queer horror, I would start with The Deep by River Solomon and then go over to Sorrowland by River Solomon. Both of them were 5 stars. They were both really interesting and intricate and impactful. So I can't say good enough things about River Solomon. Their writing style, their character development, their world building, all of it's just perfect. I love River Solomon, and I love the things that River Solomon does with gender in their books. It is so interesting. Gender really doesn't play, like, any factor in this book. And there's, like, group, like, mass couplings in the society, and it's just, like, it's not even something that you question. Like, it's not even a connection that you make. Like, you don't assume these people to even have, like, a gender. It's just not something that even comes to your mind. And I don't know how River Solomon does that, but they consistently do that in their stories. And it's just impressive what they do with gender concepts in their stories. So, let's talk about some of the stories in Queer Little Nightmares now. Rapid fire, like maybe 30 seconds per story. First story, Wooly Bully, Farmers, Bible Belt, Sapphic Teen Werewolves. I gave it a 4 out of 5, and it was like a 40-minute long story, because I'm listening to this as an audiobook. Story 2, Ghosts. It was Queer Ouija Board. It was 1 minute. I gave it 5 out of 5, so this was a poem for the most part. I think it was either a poem or like a hardcore microfiction. It's hard to really tell when you're not physically looking at it, but I loved it. It was so good. Number 3, The Vestal Song. It was 14 minutes long. I believe that it is Indian. I'm almost positive. But it is a sapphic story told by a dead woman. She becomes a predator after she dies, for the most part, based on like a very specific like Indian folktale, lore, myth. I feel like lore is the best way to categorize it. She is murdered because she is sapphic. A group of men pour acid on her, and then because no one will claim her after death because they're so offended by her sapphic nature, she ends up being a predator. Like, I think she becomes a Vestal. I think that's what they call it. Vitala? It might be Vitala. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not familiar with this lore or like monster at all, but I really, really loved it. So her like sapphic partner kind of thing like ended up moving to America, getting married, having a family, and her ashes get brought back to her hometown in India, where this girl who's still haunting the grounds sees her daughter bringing her ashes, and it's just like, that's my person. That is my person. And I gave it a 5 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting, and it brought out a story that I didn't know. Next round of stories. Story 4, The Creation of Eve. It was 1 minute. I don't really know anything about it. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I don't like it. Number 5, Nature's Mistake. It was 30 minutes long. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was about memories of violence, eating worms, a bird-person creature from an abandoned freak show that takes over a girl's body, and I believe that it eats/consumes the partner in the end. That one was weird, and I feel like it was weird because of the like abandoned funhouse location of it more than like the bird. I feel like if it was in a different location, like the bird person creature would have like settled in my brain better. Number 6, On the Origin of Trans Femme. It was 34 seconds. And it was a poem. And it was basically about how trans femmes are the daughters of the witches that were burned. And maybe in one society, like eventually after they keep coming back, they will eventually be accepted. And I loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5. It was fantastic. Number 7, Insert Coin. It was all about women in a virtual world. It was 10 minutes long. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I didn't like it very much. I felt like it had a lot to do with complacency, but I don't feel like I have enough thoughts about it to like have a coherent conversation about it. And then number 8, You're No Longer Invited. It was 1 minute long, and it was about a necromancer bringing back their love, and each time that they bring them back, like they fall in love with them less. And I gave that a 3 out of 5. I thought it was fine, but it wasn't like perfect. So I'm kind of keeping track of all of these, and I'm going to kind of take an average from what I rated every single story. An average of that will equate to my rating at the end. So that's where we're at with that. I've still got quite a bit to go with that book, but that's okay. And then I'm like 30 pages into Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armstrong. It's basically just an introduction. We are witnessing like the main character who went underneath the sea and got stuck in the submarine, and her severe trauma, and her partner who has to now live with this whole like traumatized woman that she doesn't understand what happened. She's just trying her best. We have not gotten to the portion where we really start to talk about what happened under the sea. I think we just got to the portion where we're seeing her go into the submarine and everything starts to shut off, and they're just starting to be like, what do we do? But like intense panic hasn't set in yet. That's where we're at with that. I'm gonna keep reading. So I'm so sorry if you can hear my car. It's currently running still. I don't want to turn it all the way off. So today is technically 4th of July, but we are counting it as Spooky Pride Month. Because it's the beginning of Spooky Pride, and I made my first pumpkin cream cold brew of the season. It has melted. It is hot up here. But I have finished some things. I finished today Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. And let me just say, I'm not sure how I'm going to rate it yet. So I really, really loved it in the way that it was organized and like the way the story was told. So the way that Our Wives Under the Sea is told, it's told in 2 perspectives. It's told through Miri and Leah, and they are wives, and basically this whole story starts because Leah gets sent on an expedition under the sea, and she's gone for 6 months, and Miri assumes that she's dead. So our perspectives that we're getting are Miri after Leah shows up again after being gone for 6 months in a submarine under the sea. And then we also receive Leah's perspective while she's in the submarine. So I really, really enjoyed the way that this was formatted, the way that the story itself was told. Because I think if it was told in any other way, it wouldn't have been as engaging. And I thought that it was really engaging to kind of like break apart the way that this worked. And I don't want to give any spoilers for this, but it kind of gives off, like, from what I understand, the Shape of Water vibe. I thought that that was a really interesting way to go with it. On the other hand, a really big part of me wanted like way more from Leah under the sea. I didn't feel like I wanted anything more from Leah after her trauma. I felt like her character development, like after the trauma of being under the sea for 6 months, was really strong, really well done, but I didn't feel like there was enough going on, I guess, under the sea. Like, I just wanted more. I wanted it to be more well developed, I guess. So overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought that it could have gone farther in the way of like giving us more from under the sea. And that's not like a jump scary kind of thing. It's more of a buildup of tension kind of thing. Like, I didn't feel very much tension until we got to like the very end where like things start to go a little crazy. And I'm not going to spoil any of that. But I felt like tension-wise, Leah's perspectives could have been more well-rounded. Now, I really liked Miri's character. I really liked her chapters and the way that they were constructed, and the ways in which her identity as like a hypochondriac kind of like enhanced all of the tension. Like, Miri's chapters had all of the tension, all of the panic, all of the anxiety. And Leah's were just like, I wanted just a little bit more. Like, I know that it was supposed to be in the case of like Leah's more laid back and like she is more go with the flow with that, but like you wouldn't be going with the flow in that scenario in a submarine towards the bottom of the ocean. That's just not the case. And then right now I'm driving around. I'm just kind of having like a nice time, some alone time with myself, because my partner and I have been in the house for the past couple days. And I just needed a moment away. So I'm listening to Your Little Nightmares. So I have a couple more stories to go through. So I have WWMD, which stands for What Would Medusa Do? I think that's the assumption that I'm making. It's not ever like stated as plain fact, but that's what I'm assuming. So this was a Medusa story, and it stars a trans woman protagonist. And what I really loved most about this story, it was on the longer side. I think it was 45 minutes, but it really emphasized like the gods and the deities like taking away her consent completely and her bodily autonomy, not just Poseidon, but also I think it's Athena. I don't remember, and yet I have her tattooed on my arm. It's fine. And I really, really enjoyed it. It talked a lot about like her being considered like the angry trans, I think she said indigenous woman, and like the ways in which she like bashed on white queers for their performativity and all of that, and just like her dynamic with the queer community and the people around her, and then adding on top of it this whole Medusa curse and how she's going to end up functioning with it. I really, really liked it. I'm giving it a 5-star. And then I read Twin Souls, which was only like 2 minutes long, and let me be completely honest, I don't remember what it's about at all. So I got nothing there. I guess I'm gonna give it like an NA, because I have no idea. So yeah, I'm gonna keep going on my merry way and keep driving around until the sun sets. Okay, hello. So it is time to wrap up this beginner-friendly horror vlog. And in doing that, we are going to go over the rest of the stories in Queer Little Nightmares, the anthology that I have been working my way through. So I finally finished it. So we have a few that I did not take proper notes on, and I don't really remember what they were about as much and I feel like I might have already talked about them a little bit. We have Gruesome My Love, which was 12 minutes. We have Godzilla Silhouette Against City, which was 1 minute. We have the Kirklegrim, which was 1 minute. We had Glamour Us, which I very vaguely remember it. It was 40 minutes. I'm pretty sure I enjoyed it. I'm pretty sure I gave it like a 3.5 stars. We have Creature Not of This Lagoon, which was only a minute. We have Poem Made from Pennywise, which was only a minute. So basically anything that's like a minute, they were poems. And whether I read them physically or as an audio, I'm not a big poetry person. So those were never going to be my favorite parts of it. I prefer I like short fiction. I like flash fiction. I like microfiction. But sometimes I have a hard time with poetry. It's just not my vibe. Ultimately, like the majority of that little stack was poetry, and of course it wasn't going to be my vibe. Next, we had And the Moon Spun Round Like a Top. It was an hour long. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was about blood creatures from the menstrual cycle. Oh my god, this one was messed up. This lady was having her menstrual cycle, and she thought they were coming out as big clots, but those big clots, they were alive, they were creatures, and it started out with like the size of a hamster. And it just kind of worked its way up, and like she had the size of a cat, and they were like just living in her apartment, like feasting on people, and oh, that one was messed up. I loved it. And then we had 75, which was a minute long, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So it was a poem, and it was about sex work, internalized homophobia, and ultimately it ended up as 75 Dates Pays the Rent. I really liked that one. I thought it was really interesting. Next, we had An Invisible Man is Humping. It was a minute, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Oh, it was about an invisible man and a vampire baby, and it was all about like AIDS, basically, and how their own offspring ended up fearing them. It was really good. I really liked it. And then we had The Minotaur and the Seuss. It was 15 minutes. It was Minotaur and Theseus romance in the labyrinth, but not outside. It was like they were a thing within the labyrinth when one of them was supposed to die, and then they got out of the labyrinth, and then Theseus is just being like douchey. And then we had Cryptic Cruising, which was 1 minute. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it was all about Mothman. And I do love me some Mothman. So the next we had Invert. It was a minute. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and it was all about like backstroke and like gills. It was like a water themed thing about how like you want to be within the water. I feel like I probably missed the whole like point of that one, honestly. But, you know. Next we had Strange Case, which was 31 minutes long. This one was a catfishing scenario. So it was about a med student volunteering in a nursing home and catfishing online. And he thought that he was talking to his coworker, basically. And then he ended up assaulting his coworker, being like, I know what you like. And it was like kinky, like humiliation kind of vibe, and you know, religious trauma and all that. And the coworker is just like, dude, what you doing? And then the dude realizes, dun dun dun, he's also been catfished. The next one was Naga Mark Ruffalo Dream. It was 2 minutes. You know what? I don't know who Mark Ruffalo is, and I feel like from what I understood of it, he's a famous person, and I don't know who that is. So I feel like I didn't get it. And then we had In Our Own Image, which was 20 minutes long. It was a Frankenbaby one, but it wasn't like a normal Frankenbaby. It was like this dude like saved up like all of their used condoms and receipts and everything, and created a little Frankenbaby, like a living, breathing Frankenbaby out of like used condoms and like underwear and receipts, and it was just weird. It was really good. It was really good. Like, I would give that one like a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. The next was Dad Movie, which was 6 minutes. It was about a sea monster movie and like love through gender roles, especially this one was like based off the mid-2000s. I thought it was fine. I thought it really talked about like gender roles really particularly well, so I enjoyed that. The next we had Ghost of Pride Past, which was 25 minutes, And this one was really good. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, but it was really messed up. So it's about like a gay cop and how kind of awful he was, and how he was really like promoting like cruising and like all of that culture from when I think it was like the 80s. And he was a really, really awful, corrupt, awful cop. And he got what was coming to him because he was a murderer. And you know what? He did not get away with that murder of that little black boy. He did not. And that ghost came back to haunt him, and then he got in legal trouble too. So that one was really good. And then we had Floral Arrangement. It was 1 minute, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was basically just like femmes staying alive, and I loved it. The next we had The Call. It was 27 minutes. The Call was really sweet. It was like one of the very few ones that I felt like was genuinely very sweet. So these two people hook up at a party, and then they go down to the ocean, and they walk into the ocean. Their tentacles sprout, and they turn into sea creatures, and they go into the ocean together forever. And like the whole base of it is that it is like not everyone has tentacles, like not everyone can turn into this creature. Like you have to have it in you, but you have to meet the right person to bring it out of you, which I thought was so sweet. Then we had Hideous Creatures, which was 2 minutes. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it was kind of like a Frankenstein kind of vibe. I don't want to say too much more. I really liked it though. And then our final one was Like Me. It was 9 minutes. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This one was really good. This one was about an influencer and a promoter, and he was broke. So he was like, can someone come over? And like his followers like start coming over, but all of them are broke, and they just start like out of shame or whatever, like trying to please this guy, start like butchering themselves, and he just keeps calling more people to come and help him, and then they just continue to butcher himself, and then he's just like laying in their dead bodies. So that one was a lot to get through. So I feel like overall I'm gonna give Queer Little Nightmares like a 3.5 stars out of 5. Which I feel is pretty standard for anthologies. Anthologies are a really hard thing to find your perfect reader for, because I feel like each author really has like a different perfect reader, and they definitely don't all come together. Even if you feel like you have the same vibe, like you're going for the same topic, all of that, your perfect reader is never going to be the same. So therefore there are always stories within anthologies that the person who's reading it's not going to be a fan of. Even if they like the majority of them, there's still going to be some of them in there that they're just like, oh, I feel like I kind of wasted my time on that one a little bit. So I feel like if an anthology gets anywhere between a 3 and a 4 star, I consider that a really good anthology, and I would want to read it. You know, does that make sense? Like, okay, I'm acknowledging that I didn't like some of these, but overall the experience was really well worth it. It's basically what a 3 to a 4 star is saying to me. So let's just do like a super quick overview of the horror that I have read for this little vlog scenario, this beginner's horror. So we did A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I gave that 4 stars, which it was really good. We did Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White, which I also gave a 4 star. We had The Deep by River Solomon, which is a 5 star. I loved it. I loved it. I love everything that River Solomon writes though. We read Our Wives Under the Sea, which was 4 star. The formatting of it really did it for me. And then we did Queer Little Nightmares, which I'm giving a 3.5 stars. So overall, I feel really good about where I've kind of gone in my horror journey. So I've had a really big struggle with horror because I find that I don't enjoy traditional like thriller, mystery kind of horror in any capacity. I'm very, very particular about my horror, I think. And I'm coming to figure out that how do I fix that? Just to read queer horror. My 3 all-time favorite horror books. I love Sorrowland by River Solomon. I love The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Giesbrecht. Loved that. I have to get a physical copy. And then All the White Spaces by Wilks. Those are my top 3 horror of all time, and they are all queer, and 2 of them are trans focused. So I'm really just learning that traditional horror is not for me and that queer horror is everything. So there you go. Here are some kind of beginner vibes of getting into horror if you also feel like you are not lining up with traditional and like popular, you know, thriller horror kind of vibes, but you're not willing to go like super hardcore horror yet. You want to start out with the beginning. You still want something good. I thought all of these were actually really good options, and it gives you a wide variety to kind of figure out where you want to go with it next. I've got tons of horror content coming everyone's way for the next few months because I'm in a hardcore horror mood. So if you want to stick around for that, then please do. And I will talk to everyone next time. Bye.